game on the line. You can't fold and you can't bend. Y'all be playing it safe and I be going for the win. Remember back when they was doubting on the kid. Now they tuned in cause my game too legit.
What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake and the Doc back in the house to do some more blind comparisons. Ethan, we did one of these shows last week with wide receivers, and people really loved it. So now they wanted us to do running backs, and because we're men of the people, Ethan, we are here to do some blind comparisons today on running backs. And here's the deal, and I'm going to preface the video with this and then get your opinion on it. A lot of people will be like, oh yeah, I'm definitely going to know after I hear the name. Oh yeah, well of course I'd take this guy. But the reason we do this is to remove bias altogether, because a lot of people in fantasy football see the name and they block out everything else. But when you take the name away and look at all the raw stats, sometimes it makes you look at things a little bit differently. So that's what we're going to be doing here today for the running backs.
Yeah, I also love it because sometimes the raw stats don't give you the whole picture. So you also get people that way too. So you get it both ways.
That's right. Absolutely. Now, before we get into these here real quick, just a quick reminder, our draft guide's for sale on the fantasyheadliners.com right now. Get it before you draft. It's $19.99. It's got over 600 virtual pages of all things you need to take care of yourself here this year in 2021. But now, Ethan, let's get in to the very first blind comparison, and I'm going to throw it up here on the screen, and I have all the stats filled out. So the first thing that I really want people to pay attention to, at least for this first one, is because there's a big disparity in ADP. Player on the right has a 3rd round ADP. Player on the left has a 9th round ADP. This is 6 rounds different. And then when you start to look at some of the production, player on the left, you're drafting him later, and he's doing just as good, if not better, than player on the right. You look at rushing yards, over 100 more than player on the right there. They're similar in yards per attempt. More broken tackles for player on the left. Evaded tackles similar. More breakaway tackles. I mean, we're starting to see a lot of things pretty similar here. And in my opinion, just looking at numbers, player on the left kind of looks like the guy I might want to draft here.
Yeah, I agree. And with running backs, we have to preface that there's not going to be huge ADP jumps from running back to running back because all running backs are going much, much higher than other positions. Even running back 2s on their teams can sometimes find their way up into the top 12 rounds. So we need to preface that there probably in this video will not be the massive ADP jumps that we saw in our wide receiver video. But when we were looking at just these two guys, you're right. The guy on the left seems to have an advantage in pretty much every statistical category. He has a few more attempts, so the rushing yards are a little skewed just because he is getting about 30 more attempts there. But as far as rushing touchdowns, yards per attempt is pretty much equal. You know, pretty much everything down the list is about the same, except that he's 6 rounds cheaper.
And that's the biggest thing is we're trying to find the value. At a certain point in the draft, you can't always just take risks or take gambles. You got to try to find the value. And player on the left has it. So are we ready to find out who player on the left is, Ethan?
Show me.
I hate to do this, but I got to do it to myself. It's Ronald freaking Jones and Miles Sanders. So player on the left, Ronald Jones, who I've said say no to Rojo for years. However, I don't keep that bias all season long. If he's a good start, he's a good start. But to look at the numbers right here and to see where Ronald Jones is at, it's a disgusting backfield going forward. Right, because now they have, playoff Leonard Fournette, he's still there. They brought in Gio Bernard. They still have Keyshawn Vaughn. A lot of options there. But the numbers that Ronald Jones put up last year, I could see him getting similar numbers this year, once again in an offense that's going to start clicking just like it ended 2020.
Yeah, I guess the real question is how much do the playoffs and Leonard Fournette's performance in those playoffs last year impact the opportunity for Ronald Jones? From a production standpoint, though, I am surprised, given these two guys' names. I think this says more on Miles Sanders. Now, I like Miles Sanders. I don't love Miles Sanders. He hasn't made it onto very many of my rosters in redraft or dynasty over the years just because I just don't quite know for sure if he is, an elite running back prospect, which is kind of what he was pegged at. I mean, he had some serious hype coming in. He ended up being a 1st-round rookie pick in dynasty, and then that carried over into redraft, and he's still getting this rub like he's some type of elite producer. And we haven't seen it yet from Miles Sanders. So while I do think this is a little bit eye-opening for Ronald Jones, it's really eye-opening for Miles Sanders, because we're still taking him in the top 4 rounds. That's a pretty steep price for a guy that hasn't really shown that level of production.
And part of that I have to put on the coaching staff. They haven't really committed to him, but there's already reports coming out of camp that Boston Scott is going to be used in this backfield. And just the fact that that's already being talked about, even though we already know it, they have 64 other running backs there with Kerryon Johnson and Jordan Howard and everybody else in that backfield. You're right, though. I think it's a little bit more eye-opening for Miles Sanders than it is for Ronald Jones, but it's interesting because there's a pretty big difference in ADP. All right, let's go on to the next one. You ready for the next one? I'm going to pop back up the question marks here and reset the stats. And here we go. So we're looking at the guys, again, pretty similar numbers all the way down. The biggest difference here, ADP once again, mid-second for player on the right. We got late 5th for player on the left. Outside of that, though, the numbers are pretty similar. Now, you look at rushing touchdowns, and you see 11 for a player on the right, and immediately, like, that guy's got huge touchdown upside. The other guy on the left only had 6. Well, if you meander down the form a little bit more, Ethan, you can see that player on the left also had 5 receiving touchdowns for a total of 11 touchdowns on the year. They matched. There's some eerie similarities here, but I'm kind of starting to say that just on the surface here, player on the left has almost the same amount of value as player on the right. And once again, I can save some draft capital there and get him a little bit later.
Yeah, opportunity definitely, pretty even down the board. I mean, attempts are pretty close. Targets, again, pretty close. Only 6 more for the guy on the left here. Receptions are about the same. Receiving yards, favor the left. There's a lot of, for me at least, the opportunity seems very consistent for the guy on the left. Guy on the right, rushing, that rushing touchdown total. I think that there's, when I see 11 rushing touchdowns are not a sticky number. They don't correlate year to year. Could that go down? Could we see maybe his receiving touchdowns go up? 36 receptions, 0 touchdowns. You don't see that very often when we're talking about running backs. So, again, guy on the right benefiting a lot from those rushing touchdowns, but the guy on the left is making that up in receptions. So any leagues that benefit, receptions and PPR leagues especially, the guy on the left giving you those receiving touchdowns is going to be a pretty significant boost in his favor.
Yep. So, I think we kind of agree. And here's the deal. And let me say this real quick. Because a lot of people are thinking that we're comparing these guys talent-wise, or we're trying to say one is better than the other, or we're trying to say, make, takes on certain players. We're not doing that. We're just comparing the numbers head-to-head without the name. So don't be reading. Last week we had a couple people saying, I can't believe you thought Russell Gage was better than such and such. I wasn't saying he was better. I'm just saying that you're looking for the value. And if you're really trying to find the value, doing it blindly, it really helps. So let's go ahead and look and see who these two guys are. Kareem Hunt on the left. And then on the right is Antonio Gibson. Now, Antonio Gibson is somebody that we've talked about a lot this offseason. We love the potential of Antonio Gibson. We love his potential to really grow in this offense. So going forward, I would not be surprised to see the attempts go up for Antonio Gibson and maybe even a little bit more of the receptions. But when you look at it in the round difference of almost 4 rounds, Kareem Hunt is somebody who just cannot be forgotten about. He finished inside the top 12 last year. He could well finish inside the top 12 again this year on a run-heavy team with the best offensive line. He's going to get opportunity. Kareem Hunt is just somebody, more than anything, what I'm taking away from this is just don't forget about him. If you find yourself in need of a running back in the 5th round, Kareem Hunt is your guy.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about just opportunity. We know that Kareem Hunt is going to have a role. It probably won't be exactly the same. Nick Chubb got hurt last year. That definitely helped Kareem Hunt. But if you look at his stats before and after Nick Chubb got hurt, they really didn't change a whole lot. Obviously, he had more opportunities, but in terms of just raw fantasy production, they were pretty similar before and after. So he was still trending to be a middle RB2 last season, even with Nick Chubb. So there's definitely enough for those two guys to both be successful. Antonio Gibson, I think the reason we're seeing 3 rounds higher is he has that potentially bell cow level in terms of just the number of touches that he gets. But he does have J.D. McKissic still there. That receiving touchdown total may be more reflective on J.D. McKissic's usage on third downs. Do we see him him being Antonio Gibson claim those third down targets, or do we still have this kind of thorn in our side, J.D. McKissic taking 10 plus targets a game out of the backfield? That's really where we limit that upside. And the other thing that I think is important when we're talking about these comparison, and you mentioned it, we're not saying one player is better than the other. The other thing we're trying to do and trying to give the audience here is that if you love Antonio Gibson, you should probably love Kareem Hunt too. If you love these two players, and one of them is 3 rounds before, maybe you should look at this other guy as another option for you as, oh, I missed out on Antonio Gibson. Shucks, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm sitting here in the 5th round. Kareem Hunt's still here. I loved Antonio Gibson. Kareem Hunt has that type of, production in his range of outcomes. Maybe that's a guy I pick up. So I like using that as a comparison tool in this exercise, especially because I do feel like you can, if I like one guy, you're probably going to like the other guy too.
Hey, that's a great point. This is why I bring you on, Ethan. It's for points like that make me realize that I've made a good decision by inviting you today. So great job to me, by the way. But let's move on. Let's go on to the next one now, because this is fun. I'm hoping that by now you guys are starting to guess out there who these players are before we announce them. If you are, and you're surprised by some of them, leave those comments down below as we're going through this. But here comes the next one. Let me go ahead and reset the numbers, bring back the question marks. And not a whole lot of volume here. Not a lot of big numbers, but a lot of similar numbers. Attempts, both of them under 100, right there hovering between 89 and 97. Rushing yards, sub 450 for both of them. Not a whole lot of rushing touchdowns. Their yards per attempt are pretty similar. Similar broken tackles, evaded tackles, breakaway runs are similar. Targets are, everything else is pretty similar as you go down this list. Biggest difference, once again, ADP. Player on the left is 5 rounds later than player on the right. So by looking at that and looking at the target volume that's there for the player on the left, if you're in a PPR scoring, any type of PPR scoring, I am solely focused, even though player on the right's involved, I like player on the left.
Yeah, I think from a just target perspective, clearly player on the left is got a significant advantage. It's only 9 targets, but there are just not that many running backs that are commanding that type of workload out of the backfield from a receiving perspective. He was very, productive with those targets as well. I do think that, player on the right has something in his advantage in that he clearly is still getting that passing down work. So, based on the low number of attempts for both these guys, kind of have to assume these are more pass catching running backs. But 5 rounds of ADP, again, just the value with 2 guys that are almost identical on paper clearly favors the dude that you have to pay less for.
Yeah, I'm cheap sometimes. Are you cheap?
I'm pretty cheap.
Okay, see, I'm not always cheap. It depends what I'm buying. Sometimes I'm cheap, but when it comes to fantasy football, I can be pretty cheap sometimes. So give me the cheaper option without even knowing the names, which I do. I'm prefacing that. I'm going player on the left. And it may shock some people. It may not, but here they are. Player on the left is Nyheim Hines of the Indianapolis Colts. Player on the right, Chase Edmonds of the Arizona Cardinals. A lot of people falling in love with Chase Edmonds because now there's no Kenyon Drake and they don't believe in James Conner, and they're automatically crowning Chase Edmonds as a bell cow workhorse running back in Arizona, which I do not believe whatsoever. And then a lot of people look at the recent news, right? The injury to Carson Wentz. Quentin Nelson is injured with the same exact injury as Carson Wentz, basically. They're on the offensive line. So Jonathan Taylor's I'm not going to say he's going to struggle because I don't want people to take it out of context, but that's a big hit to Jonathan Taylor, right? If they don't have Carson Wentz, if they don't have arguably one of the best offensive linemen in football, it knocks his value down a little bit. I don't think it hurts Nyheim Hines near as much, because he's not somebody who lives between the tackles. He's not running the ball at the middle. He's living in the short passing game. And if you're going to a rookie or first-time quarterback there in Indianapolis, whether it's Jacob Eason or Sam Ehlinger is already out there turning heads, maybe they bring Phillip Rivers back out of retirement. Who knows what it is? I think that really favors a running back that you can get the ball in the short passing game, screen passes, to really utilize him, take some of that pressure off of that quarterback. Nyheim Hines in the 11th round, I love that value.
Yeah, I do too. Nyheim Hines is a guy that really fits a mold that I like in my RB 4, 5, 6.
Exactly.
In redraft, especially because from a minimum, he's going to have a role in the offense. So is he going to be a bell cow? No, but you're getting that baked into his price. I mean, at 11th round ADP, you're not expecting him to be a bell cow right away. But if something were to happen to Jonathan Taylor, Nyheim Hines could step into a bell cow level role. And so I like having those types of guys. I'm not a big handcuffer when it comes to running backs, but if I am going to draft a running back later, I want him to have a role that's pretty established, and then he could potentially still benefit from an injury to another player or from something happening to a Jonathan Taylor. I don't want those things to happen, but we have to insulate ourselves from those things happening in fantasy. Chase Edmonds, really an unproven commodity. Now, some people would argue that he had 2 really great games and that should mean that we should treat him like he's going to be an elite bell cow running back. But I can tell you, James Conner isn't just going to go away. They're going to use him. He might get injured, but they're going to use him at least while they have him. So I see why people are falling in love with Chase Edmonds. But for me, I'm still going to probably go with the value. There's plenty, and I mean plenty, of really, really good players in the 6th round. Great wide receivers there. That's one of the best places to get wide receiver. Or, there could be even an elite tight end there, still there in the 6th. So that's a tough price to pay for a guy that I don't really expect to top out at much more than like a mid RB2.
I think what a lot of people seem to forget with Chase Edmonds is the reason he found success last year was the role he was in. He excels in that 3rd down role. I mean, that's what he does great with, and that's okay. Like, that's kind of what the Cardinals need at times in that backfield. Chase Edmonds isn't going to be a run between the tackle, ground and pound type of running back. If he does that, he won't last all 16, 17 games this year. It's just not going to happen. If you want him to succeed, if you want to get any value, he needs to stay in that same role. Now, on to another one, Ethan, because we're just supplying the fact. We're spitting it out today. Okay, let's reset it. Throw back up the question marks and some more stats. And here we go. And this one, fairly even. Even the ADP is pretty close. Ethan, player on the left 1 round later than player on the right. When you're looking at all the other numbers, a little bit more opportunity for player on the right, and he capitalized a little bit with 803 rushing yards, but the touchdowns are similar. Yards per attempt were similar. Player on the right, a little bit more elusive, more evaded tackles, a couple more broken tackles, a little bit more as far as the breakaway runs go. And if you don't know what a breakaway run is, it's anything over 15 yards. So it shows, he's pretty explosive as well. So on the surface, I mean, they're fairly simple. Can I get away with taking the guy on the left and passing on the guy on the right just to save a round? I don't know. But this kind of goes back to the point that you just said not that long ago. If I like one, I like the other. So if I'm in the draft, I may be able to find a way to wait around if there's somebody else on the board that's maybe fallen a little bit farther than they should have.
Yeah, exactly. And when I look at these 2 players, clearly opportunity favoring the guy on the right. We're hoping that opportunity continues into next year. But when we release these players, we'll see. I would expect, knowing the players, that opportunity will be about the same. Maybe even a little bit more of a bump on the guy on the left, just given how last season went. But one thing that really sticks out to me is that the rushing touchdowns are about the same, but almost half a yard more per rush attempt for the guy on the left. So clearly, I would argue probably a better just pure runner between the tackles. Could that lead to more rushing touchdown opportunities next year? Maybe. And that's why I think these 2 are very interesting to compare, because I feel like one guy is kind of, constantly underrated despite him producing at a pretty nice clip, while the other guy is, getting a lot of buzz, especially this preseason, and they're producing about the same. So, I would expect that one of these ADPs, the lower one, to keep going up and maybe even creep into the 2nd round. Well, I could see the guy on the left actually falling a bit and ending up more in the middle of the 4th or even the 5th round.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see the players, and obviously the people can't see them yet, to see how close they are, and then to look, and I'll tell you who they are here in just a second, but looking forward to 2021, how these guys could even be more similar moving forward. I mean, the opportunity is going to be there for both of these guys. And I'll go ahead and put it up here. Player on the left is Chris Carson, the Seattle Seahawks. Player on the right, CEH, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Now, obviously, the biggest knock on Chris Carson is dude just can't stay healthy, right? He just can't stay on the field. Rashad Penny back for one more year. Did they just run him into the ground? Does he even make it more than a couple weeks? That's another question mark. But what I really love about Chris Carson, and we saw it last year when he was on the field, he was more involved in the passing game, and he wasn't just being pounded on the ground every single time. I mean, the 20-yard rushing games, those probably went away. But I'm okay with that. If he's getting 12, 13 attempts and 4 or 5 targets, now all of a sudden that kind of equals itself out, and we saw him produce with 4 receiving touchdowns as well. CEH, I do expect to take a step forward in this offense. Is he ever going to be that goal line guy? Does he continue to struggle there? If he does, Chris Carson could double him up in touchdowns, and that could be an issue moving forward.
Yeah, and I think you're right. The biggest question we have with Clyde Edwards-Helaire this year has got to be, how effective is he at getting into the end zone? I would say that just given the fact that he had 36 receptions last year, only 1 receiving touchdown is kind of a disappointment for a guy that in college was supposed to be an elite receiving back. He wasn't as efficient even with those targets. I mean, 55 targets for a running back, you would expect him to catch 45 of those usually. That's a number that concerns me a little bit. Why isn't he catching it when he's getting these opportunities? It's not like he's got a bum quarterback throwing him the ball.
Right.
So those are things that I think we still have some questions with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But again, this is one of those conversations where if you love Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but he starts creeping up and he ends up going late second, even middle of the second, because people are really loving him, don't feel bad. Just wait and take Chris Carson.
Yeah, 100% agree. All right, let's move on to our last one here, Ethan, because this one may get the blood flowing for some people. This one is spicy, but we like spicy. And I'll go ahead and reset the numbers here, throw back up the question marks, and we can see here another tandem of running backs that fairly similar. Player on the right can break more tackles. Player on the left, a little bit more elusive, can evade more tackles, but they're right there in line with breakaway runs. Yards per attempt does favor the player on the right by about a half a yard, and that's something you mentioned earlier here in the show. But outside of that, not a whole lot stands out, and for me at least, because even look at fantasy points per game. I mean, 16.4 to 16.5. I mean, this is pretty dang close for these guys, but it's almost, a 4-round difference, three rounds basically, because it's end of first, beginning of fifth. This is a fairly big difference. So if you don't want to spend that high pick in the first round, like you mentioned earlier, you could get some similar production potentially at a player on the left a couple rounds later.
Yeah, and the evaded tackles is a number that really stood out to me because
Biddy,
a nine more evaded tackles on similar opportunities. Player on the left finds a way to make people miss, and that is a skill that I really like to see in a running back. More broken tackles on the right. So maybe the guy on the right is more of a what you would call more of a tougher runner. He can actually absorb contact. Player on the left more evades contact, but from just a stylistic standpoint, you're going to find that these guys are pretty similar. I love that they're both efficient with their targets. We talked about that on the last group. I want to see players that are efficient at catching the ball and turning that into a free half a point in half point PPR, a free point in PPR. Even if they aren't crazy in terms of receiving yards or receiving touchdowns, having targets and catching them can still provide fantasy value. So, and these guys both do that. So why is it that one guy is a first round pick and one guy's a fifth round pick if they're both producing almost exactly the same number of fantasy points a game last year?
Yep, agreed. And it's crazy knowing who the players are that I would not have expected player on the left to evade more tackles than player on the right, and player on the right to break more tackles than player on the left. Like it seems like it's backwards. And I'll go ahead and throw the names up here so you can see them and get ready, because the comment section is going to go crazy here for a second. So I know you know how to handle this, Ethan. But player on the left is Myles Gaskin. Player on the right, Austin Ekeler. Now, I love Austin Ekeler. Don't get me wrong. I'm a big Ekeler guy. I think Ekeler is very disrespected in the fantasy game, because the guy can put up huge numbers because he's so involved in the passing game and the receiving game. But new offensive coordinator, new head coach, do they continue to, bombard him with targets when there's other options in that offense? A lot of people are going to come here and say, dude, you can't include Austin Ekeler. He was out most of the year last year. And what would you say to those people, Ethan?
Well, there's a reason that I picked these two guys. And because I knew this would be the argument that some people are going to make, they both played the same number of games last year, 10 games for each of these guys. So apples to apples comparison here. We are not playing this guy was injured, so that's why his stats are not as good as the other guy. No. Myles Gaskin spent some time on the IR. He spent some time on the COVID list. So both these guys played 10 games. So this is pretty close to an apples to apples comparison in terms of just the number of games played. So don't hit me with that in the comments. If you see someone trying to hit me with that in the comments, just know I'm just going to put this timestamp in and let them know that we already talked about it. So watch the videos before you comment.
Yeah, exactly. That's what it's all about, dropping big facts. But yeah, a little bit crazy, right? Because I love Austin Ekeler, like I said, but Myles Gaskin, somebody else we've been pretty high on here this offseason. And if you look at just fantasy points per game, they're basically tied. So, like you mentioned earlier, you miss out on Ekeler, follow it up with Gaskin a few rounds later, and you could get some similar production, especially if we see that step forward in Miami that a lot of people expect here in 2021. But this is what's fun about this kind of stuff, right? Doing blind comparisons and taking the names away, Ethan, really adds a different, style to these types of videos, because we get so used to just talking about a player and his stats and, what to expect. And a lot of people may tune it out once they hear the actual name of a player. Like, we just had a video earlier in the week where Kyle was talking about how he doesn't prefer Deontay Johnson over maybe even Chase Claypool or Juju this year based off of some value. And a lot of people just see the names and they immediately think, Juju sucks. I don't want anything to do. I want Deontay Johnson, instead of actually looking at the numbers. And this is why this is such a great tool to use, because you remove that name bias here. And we love doing blind comparisons. If you enjoy this type of stuff, you want us to do it for the other positions, quarterback and tight end, we can do that too. But make sure you leave us a comment down below. But blind comparisons, Ethan, are something that I think we're getting pretty good at these.
I think we are too.
I feel like we knocked these ones out of the park today.
We're really crushing it, and it's so fun.
Yeah. They actually are a lot of fun to put together, to find players that are similar. I'm actually learning things myself. And I literally watch and study football all day, every day, and I'm learning things by doing things this way. So this is where it's really a good tool. But we're going to continue to do them. If you like them, make sure you leave us a comment down below. Hit that like button for us. We love those here in the offseason. Football is right around the corner. We got a preseason game here coming up that we're all going to be tuned in to watch, because we love football. So if you do too, hit that subscribe button down below. Listen, we got you covered all year long. At least one video a day from now through the end of the season. And I said, yes, at least one per day. We may even have some days with 2 in a day. We're about to turn it up, Ethan. We're about to start pumping out some major content here in the coming weeks. So make sure you stay subscribed for that. But for the doc, for myself, we appreciate you guys tuning in today. Make sure you have a good rest of your day, a good rest of the week, and we'll talk to you later.